Weezer fell into a bit of a rut in the 2000s. The band's final album of the 90s was Pinkerton. Famous for its authentic sound, Rivers Cuomo poured his heart into every song. This transparency was met with a resounding,
"Oh, come on! He's history's greatest monster!"
The Green Album, and really every album made in the following decade, were a direct response to that rejection. Rivers gained a fear of authenticity that he just couldn't shake, even after Pinkerton started to be looked back at fondly. He would try to express himself honestly from time to time, but often catch himself. Any demo where Rivers sounded vulnerable was eventually cleaned up and forced to conform to the general poppy sound that had given the band moderate to severe success. Nowhere is this more clear than on the third track of their 7th studio album, Raditude.
I can't stop partying, partying, I can't stop partying, partying, I can't stop partying, partying, I can't stop partying, partying.
October 30th, 2009 marked the international release of Raditude. Like with any album, the band shortly thereafter started touring across the country performing these new tracks. It was during this tour, on December 6th, that a tour bus carrying Rivers, as well as his wife Kyoko and his infant daughter, would skid on some black ice and crash off a highway in upstate New York. Miraculously, there were no fatalities, and Rivers' family were unharmed. Rivers, however, suffered a ruptured spleen, a punctured lung, a torn shoulder joint, 3 cracked ribs, and some internal bleeding. He recalled years later in an interview with Rolling Stone, "Lying on the floor of the bus, I couldn't move. Could barely breathe. I didn't know if I was going to live. Firefighters had to use a tool called the Jaws of Life to cut a hole in the bus to get Rivers out." The remainder of the tour was cancelled. It was shortly after recovery that Rivers signed a deal with a small indie label, Epitaph, to make their 8th studio album, Hurley. Hurley was made as an honest attempt at escaping the mold made by the band after Green. They left their longtime record company Geffen, returned to self-producing, which they experimented with on Pinkerton, and they scrapped everything at the last minute only to finish the entire album in 2 weeks. Pat Wilson, the band's drummer, would tell Rolling Stone, "That was such a weird record." And weird it was, though not nearly as weird as Rivers' self-made conspiracy of a practically finished sea opera made this same year, which he confirmed never actually existed. I'm just dropping this here. It happened in 2010, and I have nowhere else to put this, I'm sorry. In an interview a month before the release of the album, Rivers told Spin.com, "I think Hurley is a record that will appeal to all kinds of Weezer fans. Fans that like super raw, emotional stuff will be totally stoked with songs like Runaway and Memories, and then at the same time, there are really great pop songs with really great melodies and hooks, fun sing-along choruses. So I think everyone's going to love it." That is a statement that should sound very familiar to you if you've seen my last video, as it's a very similar description to how Rivers described Make Believe before its release. Whether they struck a better balance between these two sounds on Hurley is up to listeners. The album was released September 10th, 2010 to moderate critical reception. That same day, an interview with Rivers was released by the AV Club. This interview is substantial because it brings the first mention of the band's next studio album. Rivers told the interviewer, "These new songs sound totally different from Hurley. Ha ha ha. Hurley was kind of dark, and the new songs sound like you're 16 riding your bicycle to get a Slurpee." The sound Rivers was describing here would never be heard. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Hurley was released in September. In spite of this, it still wasn't the band's final album of the year. 2010 would also be the year that the band wrapped up their compilation album, Death to False Metal. Originally called Odds and Ends, the idea of a compilation album had been floating around since 2003. It seemingly didn't really start production until after Raditude wrapped, and it didn't get the name Death to False Metal until August of 2010. It was released on November 2nd, 2010, and featured songs that were recorded anywhere between 1998 and 2008. It barely got any reviews, totally overshadowed by the band's release of Pinkerton Deluxe at the same time. It's mostly remembered today as the only album more forgettable than Hurley. The band working on Death to False Metal and Pinkerton Deluxe at the same time as Hurley likely contributed to its rushed production, and the postponement of their next studio album.
Please could you stop the noise? I'm trying to get some rest.
Rivers didn't correct the AV Club interviewer when they mentioned a 2011 release date for their next album. Nonetheless, the year remained quiet for the band publicly. He told Rolling Stone in 2014, "I wanted to make a complex, classic album, and I knew it was going to take time. This break was likely also due in part to some tragedies that befell the band. Many people close to Rivers may have died in 2011, though dates remain vague, such as Rivers' grandfather and an ex-girlfriend. What concretely happened this year was Rivers being forced to spend 5 months separated from his family due to complications with the birth of his son, as well as a former bassist for the band, Mikey Welsh, dying of an apparent drug overdose on October 8th. The band continued to tour throughout the year, as well as contributing a cover of You Might Think for the Cars 2 soundtrack and releasing Alone 3: The Pinkerton Years in December. Alone is a series of compilation albums released by Rivers, beginning with Alone, the home recordings of Rivers Cuomo in 2007. These compilation albums often consist of dozens of formerly unreleased demos, resulting in Weezer having some of the most accessible demos of any mainstream band. One of these albums is Alone XI, the EWBAITE Years. Hey, look at that album cover. That's so weird. Usually these album covers are just silly pictures of Rivers. What's with the Christ stuff, you're asking? Well, stupid avatar that I chose to represent the audience in post, this demo compilation shows an album cover with an early draft of EWBAITE. Beginning production this same year, Ecce Homo has gained some serious notoriety from the fanbase. Despite being an early concept for a widely beloved album, people seem to really think that this could have worked. The album would have been 3 acts centered around a character named Sebastian who, for reasons that would have been left deliberately ambiguous, would have lived through several important historical events, all while realizing the necessity for faith in a higher power. Except it's all symbolic to growing as a person in the various stages of life. It wasn't the band's first album concept centered around a fictional protagonist, with Songs from the Black Hole, a concept album for Pinkerton, being a famous example, and there was also the Sea Opera demos from 2010, which, let me remind you, was a hoax. This year began with some retooling on Ecce Homo from January to February of 2012. This mainly consisted of replacing some songs and cutting down from 16 tracks to 15. I imagine he couldn't get much done during these months for the simple reason that Rivers & Co. were on a cruise from January 19th to January 23rd, 2012. What cruise, you ask? Why, the Weezer Cruise, of course! Beg me to elaborate all you want, I'm making a video on this soon enough, because holy shit, what? A color album was also in the works this year, likely to be a purple or black album. I'll call it purple even though it shares a lot of the same tracks as black. Take this fact with a grain of salt though, as the site I learned this from gave me some shoddy information on the Sea Opera demos, mainly that they existed. Rivers had conducted listening parties and focus groups with fans from 2010 to 2014.
So, you want a realistic, down-to-earth album that's completely off the wall and swarming with magic robots?
You kids don't know what you want. That's why you're still kids, 'cause you're stupid.
And these fans seem to not think highly of the demos that would have been on Purple. The idea was very quickly scrapped. Finally, this year marked the end of Ecce Homo. Rivers would keep the 3-act structure and the patriarchal themes in EWBAITE, as well as many of the tracks. But a big change was coming that would redefine the album. 2013 was quiet. With the exception of the announcement of a second Weezer Cruise to set sail in early 2014, and a couple performances here and there was radio silence from the band publicly. Then, according to allpress.com, at a fan event in Los Angeles on October 25th, frontman Rivers Cuomo answered questions about the band's upcoming plans, and according to multiple attendees, he said the band will begin working on their 9th proper full-length in January with none other than Rick Ocasek, who is responsible for producing 2 of Weezer's most commercially successful albums, 1994's Triple Platinum Weezer, aka the Blue Album, and 2001's Platinum Weezer, aka the Green Album. That's right, baby, the King would be returning for one last hurrah with the band.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Just as Rivers told fans in Los Angeles, the band started recording on January 16, 2014. They would record throughout 3 3-week sessions beginning that month at the Village Studios in Santa Monica. Before they could do any more recording, the band had serious business to attend to. Where, you ask? Oh, the Bahamas. And they arrived there on the Weezer Cruise, baby! Woo! Yeah, baby! That's what I'm waiting for! That's what it's all about! Whoa! The next 3 weeks of recording were done in March. This same month, the band began uploading teasers for the upcoming album on their YouTube channel. Rivers has never been a stranger to fan participation in the months prior to a new release. Most recently, he's been making TikToks featuring some yet-to-be-released tracks off of Seasons.
All summer long.
The main difference here is that the EWBAITE teasers were rad as fuck. Why? I'll explain in a second. Like usual, despite the band having already gotten through 2/3 of the recording process, Rivers felt unsure of the album's direction. He told Rolling Stone, "I had a lot of songs, but I didn't have total confidence in anything I was doing." But after going to a Vipassana meditation retreat that May, Rivers knew what he wanted from the album. That same month, Rivers started using the teasers as a way to tell the story of 2 men and 3 questions which correspond with the 3 themes of the album. 1. How can he find a girl? 2. How can he find fame? And 3. How can he find his father? He being Sebastian, a fictional character based on Rivers, who mirrors Rivers' life in many ways. The person asking these questions is Joe Laffoley, a scientist who just invented the Futurescope, a machine that can see into the future. For whatever reason, this machine more often than not displays the life of Sebastian, as he finds fame with his band, the Astronauts. The first of the album's themes we'll be exploring is Belladonna, featuring 6 songs all about Sebastian's relationships with women. Belladonna roughly meaning beautiful woman in Italian. Ain't Got Nobody was the first track of the album, and is also implied to be the first hit song of the band The Astronauts. It's all about relationship struggles. Its teaser mainly shows someone driving in the desert before suffering a horrendous crash. Who's the driver? Why do they have nobody? Have a little patience, we're literally just getting started. Da Vinci was co-written by Josh Alexander and is my personal favorite track on the album. The teaser shows a woman that Sebastian is implied to be having relationship troubles with, named Bella. It begins with her answering the phone excitedly, then the Futurescope malfunctions for a few seconds, only for the feed to cut back showing her now visibly distraught. Go Away is one of the few duets between a man and a woman that the band has ever made. The co-writer and female vocalist on the track is Bethany Cosentino of Best Coast. The teaser for the track shows Joe Laffoley in his first appearance on my list after gaining access to the Futurescope again after 3 days. He was stopped from using it when his colleagues discovered what it was. In the future, we see our protagonist Sebastian knocking on the door of the girl from the Da Vinci teaser. Fitting the lyrics of Go Away, which plays in the background, Bella refuses to let Sebastian in. Cleopatra is the next song of the album, the theme and the story of Sebastian. The song is about a manipulative woman who's lost some of her seductive abilities with age. The teaser features Joe Laffoley on the cusp of answering the first question, as he begins to gather that one of the women he's been seeing is a bit older and more experienced than Sebastian. Then, he turns on the Futurescope to find Sebastian strumming an acoustic guitar as a picture of the older woman whose name we found out is Cleo burns in his car along with some books which we'll learn about later. Yes, this is the aftermath of the car crash from Ain't Got Nobody. Good on you for paying attention. Lonely Girl is the 4th track on the album, originating from Homely, a demo from the Green Album era. Its teaser ends the story of Sebastian's love struggles, as he and Bella embrace on the desert sand. Joe crosses off the first of 3 themes as the Futurescope reveals everything but the books burnt in Sebastian's car. This sets up the next theme. The Panopticon Artist features 3 songs about fame, though I'll only be discussing 2 for now, as I'm just as cryptic as the teasers, tee-hee. By the way, a Panopticon is a prison where any of the inmates can be observed by one guard at any time without the inmates knowing. It's a pretty good metaphor for fame. I've had it up to here as a response to unfair critique received by both Weezer and the Astronauts' work. It gets 3 teasers that all make reference to the idea of outside meddling ruining the Astronauts. In the first part, we see Sebastian in a meeting at Electric Records with 2 record executives. They both have names, but I prefer to call the male one Sleazy. Sleazy pretends to be a big fan of his band's work, like El Scorpio, then gives Sebastian a few books saying that if he follows them, it'll
guarantee your exposure to the greatest number of people.
Sebastian accepts these books as he receives a reassuring smile from the other record executive, an older woman. In the second teaser, we see Joe print out what is likely an excerpt from some music critic's blog. In it, we see what the media thinks of the Astronauts, with the critic giving them flattering accolades like least favorite artist, biggest lame-os, most annoying song, most disappointing album, and die in a plane crash. Finally, in the third, we see Sebastian angrily walking out of a meeting with Sleazy and the older woman, who you've likely already guessed is the seductress Cleo. At the end, we hear loud knocking on the door of Joe Laffoley's lab. Back to the Shack was the comeback single for Weezer, but also mirrors the protagonist Sebastian's big comeback after ditching Electric Records. While it can be heard in the background of many teasers, its own teaser displays the end of the Panopticon Artist theme, as Joe sees the band making a comeback and crosses off the second theme from his journal. Full disclosure, the band we see in the teaser is Weezer, not the Astronauts, but these 2 bands are used pretty interchangeably in the teasers. They're the same band. The final theme is Patriarcha, all about father figures, patriarcha meaning patriarch in Latin. Rivers himself had a complicated relationship with his father, as any fan of Say It Ain't So can tell you. He told Rolling Stone in 2014, "Now that I'm a father, I've forgiven my parents." Eulogy for a Rock Band is all about paying tribute to Weezer and the astronauts' musical forefathers. Its teaser marks the first appearance of Sebastian. In it, he makes the decision to move to Los Angeles much to the distress of his mother, as Joe prints out a newspaper from after Sebastian finds success. The British Are Coming is about the American colonists' independence from their imperial papa. Its teaser shows Sebastian in a wrecked car, pulling out a guitar, the books that executive gave him, and a picture of Cleo. This is clearly meant to show him at his lowest point, before he lets go of all the things that encumbered him in Cleopatra's teaser, and before his big comeback in Back to the Shack's teaser. Foolish Father is about forgiving your dad for any mistakes he made when you were a kid, because he was foolish. The song's teaser starts with an award show, with the host presenting the astronauts the award for Album of the Year. As Joe watches the screen, he sees Sebastian dedicate his award to his father, Joe Laffoley, saying,
He was a great man.
Joe puts on a subtle smile, mouthing the word 3 as he's carried away by men in white coats. He's answered his third question. The father is him. The credits roll on the final teaser released the day after the album. That still leaves the Futurescope trilogy, which are the final 3 tracks on the album. Each one corresponds with a different theme, but since they didn't really fit into any of those sections, I thought it'd be best to put them in their own section. The Wasteland is the first of the trilogy and the third song in the Panopticon artist's theme. Its teaser simply shows the creation of the Futurescope. Although it's an instrumental, we can surmise themes of death from the album's liner notes, featuring the phrase Lasciate ogni speranza voi ci andate. Well, I don't know. From Dante's Divine Comedy, which translates to, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter." This is likely referencing the symbolic death of the astronauts. The next track is Anonymous, the second part of the Futurescope trilogy. It's the only one with lyrics, and from those lyrics we can find that it fits the theme of patriarcha. With songs talking about literal fathers to imperial fathers to rock and roll fathers, it's only fitting that the last song with this theme has the character of Sebastian literally meeting God. Early lyrics for the song had a verse that referenced this fact directly.
I approach you most humbly, but I don't know what to call you. Jesus is wrong, Buddha is weird, God is funny, science is cold.
The teaser for this track mainly serves to reveal the album cover for EWBAITE, but funnily enough also shows off an early version of the song where it was called My Mystery instead. Return to Ithaca is the last song on the album, the third song of the Futurescope trilogy, and the 6th Belladonna track. Like The Wasteland, it has no lyrics, but again we can find meaning based on the linear notes for the song, which is just an excerpt from Homer's Odyssey. You dogs! You never thought I'd come back home from the kingdom of the Trojans. So you ravaged my house, lay in bed by force beside my women slaves, my women, and wooed my wife illicitly, though I was alive. Fearing neither the gods who hold wide heaven, nor that there'd be any man's censure thereafter. The teaser for the song is actually one of the first to be released, and as such, only really serves to show Laffoley using his big brain to find the release date of the album. Apparently, Joe didn't take into account the extra weeks of recording the band did in July.
106.7 K-Rock is KROQ, the Kevin and Bean Show at 7:18.
But I'm confused, Kevin. That sounds like Weezer, but those guys don't put out records anymore. What are we listening to there?
Hey, Weezer. How are you?
Hey, Weezer.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome back to the shack.
With full confidence in his vision for the album, Rivers returned to the Village recording studios in June for the final 3 weeks of recording. Then he came back one last time on July 28th to do some touch-ups and record one more song. And some sources say that recording didn't finish until August 20th, but after that, all done. The album was initially set to be released September 30th, but probably because of these extra sessions, this was pushed back to October 7th. Just as Rivers predicted in his teasers for the album, forgetting about commercial appeal led to Weezer's biggest success in over a decade. The band's 4 years of effort paid off, as Everything Will Be Alright in the end went on to be the best critically received album by the band since Pinkerton. Even Pitchfork, who famously hates everything Weezer does unless it's not cool to hate anymore, said, "How good does a Weezer album have to be before it can be considered actually good?" As it turns out, about this good. The fan base looks back at EWBAITE fondly. It often ranks high on people's tier lists and is an official member of the Weezer Council according to the third highest post on the Weezer subreddit. It's pretty often overlooked though. I think especially now that you understand where a lot of the random voice lines and static from the songs are coming from, the album really deserves another listen. I personally love Everything Will Be Alright in the End. It is, to this day, the only album I have ever bought on iTunes. I was gonna buy more, but then I realized it isn't 2005 and Spotify exists. What likely remains the most iconic thing to come out of this era is the artwork for the album. Though Rivers initially considered using artwork inspired by the work of Paul Laffoley, even naming one of the main characters in the album's story after him, he instead went with a painting done by Chris McMahon. McMahon specializes in painting monsters into old thrift store landscapes. The monster in this particular painting has been dubbed Smooch by the Weezer fanbase, and if you look at McMahon's website, you'll see that he himself is fond of the name. Smooch actually made his way into the album's story, and I just flat out forgot to put that into the video. In the anonymous teaser, we see a young Sebastian tossing and turning in bed. He opens his eyes as the camera zooms in to show he was having a nightmare about the monster from the album cover. This is where the audio from Ain't Got No Buddies intro comes from.
I had another nightmare.
Go back to sleep, honey. Everything will be all right in the end.
Ain't got nobody. Ain't got nobody.
Can't quite get the ending right. That's okay, I'll figure it out later.